This episode of All About the Gear is brought to you by BorrowLenses.com.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back for another exciting episode of All About the Gear. I am Frederick Van Johnson, joined here by Mr. Gearhead himself, Mr. Doug K. Hey, Doug, what's going on?
A whole lot, Frederick. We've got some good stuff to talk about today.
I'm excited. I know you've got that little Sony RX100 Mark II, which is, I think that thing was voted the best pocket camera by someone. Who you're going to tell us about that, and I want to find out why and why. So my questions. I know you got a bunch of stuff to talk about, but my questions are, why do you need a pocket camera these days? Like when you have a phone that could be your pocket camera, are these types of cameras on their way out? And, or in other words, who's this camera for? So take it away.
Yeah, I didn't think you were going to ask me that question. I'm not prepared. That's a really good question. Anyway, I think, there are still cases where you want a more serious camera than what you're going to get from your mobile phone. You want something that has an optical zoom instead of just an electronic zoom. You want something where maybe you can control the aperture, the shutter, exposure compensation. Now, some of these things you can do with a mobile device, but I think the point of this point and shoot, at least, is that it's aimed at the higher end photographer who's going to appreciate the quality difference. As you mentioned, this is the Mark II. Yep. And it's pretty much the same as the Mark I, except that it's got a 2 after it. And it's
those marketing people.
Oh yeah. Well, as somebody pointed out in a review, the fact that they called it the Mark II means that they had confidence that the Mark I was a hit. If the first version comes out and it's a flop, you don't call the second version Mark II. You give it a whole new name, right?
Yeah.
So that's an important thing.
Okay.
I said that's intelligent. So why did we do this? We've been doing all sorts of mirrorless stuff. We've been doing all sorts of high-end cameras. So why a point and shoot for All About the Gear? And as you mentioned, a number of people have decided that this is the best point and shoot out there. Our friend Gordon Lang over at Camera Labs said it is his favorite, Gordon's favorite. Unfortunately, he misspelled favorite. He puts an OU in there. I don't know why he does that.
I don't know. I think they own the word favorite. So they had it first.
So it's favor. I can't even pronounce it. Okay. Anyway, it's his favorite. A site that I like is called Wirecutter. They called it the best point and shoot, the best pocket camera out there. And so for those reasons and the fact that Borrow Lenses was nice enough to get us one to work with.
Thank you, Borrow Lenses.
Thank you, Borrow Lenses. I decided that this would be a good one to check out. So the camera is based on the version 1, which wasn't called the version 1, that came out about a year ago, and it came out in June of 2013. It cost $750 US. Mm-hmm. It has the most important thing. It has great image quality. That's the most important thing. Talking about some of the things we've done before, it has, of course, a tilt screen in Sony style, which means it'll tilt down 45 degrees or up. Let me show it a little better here. It's got a great LCD on the back, great high ISO performance. And
is that one of the main reasons why you'd want this camera? Because I'm still thinking, all the things that you've listed down, I'm like, okay, would I spend $750 on that when I have my iPhone or Android device that is capable and lets me shoot and share and all that? And when you mentioned the high ISO, maybe that's the reason that I'd want it. Is that the main selling point?
I would say it's generally image quality, and high ISO is a part of image quality. As of whether or not you should actually do this if you have a phone that you like, I'm going to save that till the very end to force you to finish the show with me and go all the way through.
Look at that, a cliffhanger.
That's
Mid-show
right.
Cliffhanger.
That's right. But that's the point. I mean, we've talked about on This Week in Photo how the point-and-shoot market is sort of dying, and it's being replaced by the mobile devices and what's happening to it, and people are trying to keep it alive. As we know, Sony is out there throwing out anything they can into the marketplace. Mm-hmm. In this case, they had a success with the RX100 and followed it up with the version 2 that pretty much makes up for some of the things that they didn't get right or they could improve on.
And you're going to go through those things, right? The deltas or the changes?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to do it. it's a 20 megapixel sensor, so it's got a nice sensor in terms of, megapixels. It's a 1-inch sensor, which is essentially the same size as the Nikon 1. The big technology change that they added is something called the back illuminated sensor. Normally, if you look at a camera sensor, you have the little micro lenses on the front, and you have the photodiodes, the photosites behind them, but in between you have all the little teeny wires that connect, and for some reason those are normally on in front of the photosites, and what that means is they block some of the light. So
that's kind of how our eyes work, by the way. So it's very similar.
So that's a good point. So now what Sony's done with, they call it back illuminated. I don't know quite what that is, but I guess it means that the sensor sort of turned around. The light's coming into the sensor and the wires are behind it. And that means they're actually getting more light. Sony claims that this is about a 40% greater sensitivity, and I think the lab reports you see out there to support that this has 40%. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it's some people are saying it's at least a stop better than the predecessor, which is pretty good. It's got a zoom lens, a pancake style zoom lens, which is about it's a 3.6 zoom in full frame equivalent. That's about 28 to 100 millimeters, ranges from about f1.8 to f4.9. But then again, it's a point and shoot, and that means it's filled with compromises. This isn't going to do anything as well as a big camera. The question is, as we'll get to, is it better than a mobile device to make it worthwhile?
That's my big question.
Yeah. So the zoom range is somewhat limited, I think, compared to some of the competitors out there. It has a digital zoom, which a lot of these devices have. We also are used to that in our mobile devices. And that's really just cropping. That's really just going in and, throwing away pixels at the sides of the image.
Scaling up the image, right?
Right.
Interpolation, we call it. Right.
Yeah, so it gets noisier and noisier, and you think you've got a big image, but you're really just throwing pixels away. So that's something. And in fact, in the video mode, you can't turn that off, so you can accidentally get into the digital zoom and not really know that you did it.
So it'll just basically cross probably a little line in there that tells you when you're crossing from optical to digital, and then from that point forward, it's interpolation zone. Right.
Exactly right. So you're zooming the thing, and it's getting tighter and tighter, and then it sort of hesitates right at that line, crosses the line, and keeps going. And what you don't realize, unless you're paying attention, is that you've now gone into digital zoom land and throwing away pixels.
Call that the twilight zone.
That's right. Now, one interesting thing about this is, let me show you what they got here. In addition to the camera, Sony's got this viewfinder. This viewfinder is the same as the one that comes on that you can get with the RX100, for example, and it simply sits there and goes into the hot shoe. This is new since the previous version. Okay, so you've got an electronic viewfinder. It's a very good electronic viewfinder. It's great. Of course, it makes it a little bit larger camera, but here's the thing about this: it costs $450.
I knew you were going to say that. More than half the price of the camera.
It's more than half the price of the camera. I mean, it means that if you buy this with the electronic viewfinder, where have I got it? You're spending $1,200.
So that viewfinder is probably made from what? Shaved diamonds and unicorn dust, right?
Yeah. It's a high grade thing. So, should you get it or not? You're gonna have to wait till the end of the show for me to give you a recommendation on that.
Not another cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Overlapping cliffhangers. Uh-oh.
I know. What can we do? So anyway, that's an option you've got. Again, it's the same one that comes with the RX1R, or you buy for the RX1R, and even then, that was a very expensive camera. And at that point, we said, "Gee, that's a lot of money to spend for a viewfinder." I mean, I've got cameras that cost less than that viewfinder does.
Yeah, I wonder how many they sell of those viewfinders. I mean, are people just like, you know what, I gotta have it at any price? I don't care.
Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? Autofocus is pretty good. Manual focus is, I was so excited about manually focusing this camera at first because it's got the great focus peaking that you get with all the Sony cameras these days, except for one thing. When you go to manually focus, you've got to sit there and turn this thing. And you might turn this focus ring, this lens ring around, 20 times before it focuses. You just keep pressing like that. Yeah. I don't know what it is. I looked around. I thought maybe I was doing something wrong. I couldn't figure out why I had to turn this dial, this lens wheel,
So
over
you're
and
like,
over and over again.
that's the focus ring, and you're just like spinning, 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 trying to get it to actually get to the range where you can fine tune the focus.
That's right. That's right. And it looks like it's not doing anything, but it is. Well, I go online and I read some other people's reviews. Sure enough, that's the way it works. So there's something fundamentally wrong here. And basically,
Sony's way of punishing you, so to force you back into autofocus mode.
That's right. And it basically is telling you this is not a camera you can use for autofocus. Now, Sony has something they call DMF, which is, I don't know, dumb manual focus or something like that.
Probably dynamic, I would guess, knowing Sony.
Oh, probably. Everything dynamic now. Yeah. But you autofocus and then you can fine tune it with this thing. Well, even that's sort of a joke. So stick with the autofocus with this camera. The autofocus is good.
So the DMF though, the DMF, just if I'm not mistaken, it's kind of like on the GX7 when you put it in, I forget what Panasonic names it, but when you zoom in or when you're checking focus in manual focus mode, it will do a picture-in-a-picture zoom in on a quadrant or a section of the image to let you fine tune the focus. And then when you let go of the focus ring or tap the shutter button, it pops back out into full screen. I think that's right. What the DMF piece is. Yeah,
exactly. So it's basically automatic focus with manual fine tuning.
Yeah, yeah.
And it works great on the NEX cameras, all the other Sony cameras, but for some reason on this one, there's just something weird about the way the focus ring. Which is a soft ring, obviously. It's focused by wire. Just you got to crank and crank and crank it. I don't know. Who knows what
the other question then becomes: so it sounds like the stills are good. What about video on this thing? Does it stand up?
Video's good. It will do 1080p. It will go up to 50 frames a second or 60 frames a second in video, depending on where you live in the universe. Whatever the standard is. It's got stereo mics built in that you can almost not see them on this thing. No external stereo input though. I mean, it's not. Well, it's just too small. There's nowhere to put it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I should. That's not quite right. You can do it on the hot shoe. Oops.
Right, with the accessory. That's kind of like with the Olympus OMD EM5. You can get the optional hot shoe, which gives you an audio input jack on it, but. Yeah, it's you lose it, and you got to find. Yeah, it's like ugh.
Well, you end up with this nice teeny camera with accessories that are 5 times the size of the thing.
Yeah, so, you got Optimus Prime there with all these things hanging off of it.
That's right. Yeah. It's a transformer camera. Leave it alone and it just unfolds. But I think the video quality is good. The one thing that disappointed me was this digital zoom, but you just have to avoid that. You can also shoot stills while you're doing video. You can sit there, as long as you're not at the slow motion speed, again, 50 or 60. If you're shooting at 24 or 30, 24, 25, or 30 frames a second, you can actually take still images while the video is going on, which is sort of a fun thing to do.
Can you? I might be answering my own question as I form it in my head, though. You're shooting video at a specific frame rate, i.e., shutter or a specific shutter speed. Can you? What shutter speed would you be shooting the still at? The exact same shutter speed, or can you use a different shutter speed for the stills that you fire off while the video is happening?
I'm not sure. I think all they're doing is freezing a video frame, a full frame. So that's what I would do, because otherwise they certainly can't close and open the physical shutter.
Right.
If they did that, they'd destroy the video. So
something's going on already.
It's a frame capture, I'm sure, is what it is. But it's sort of a nice thing to have, in case that's your thing, right?
If you need that, and you can't go into the computer later and
you can always do it that way.
You could.
It's got HDMI output, which is nice for people who want HDMI output, who want to, you can play it back on your TV and play it back on things like that.
That's good.
You could probably play it back on you can't play it back on your iPad, because iPads don't have HDMI input for some annoying reason.
Right.
What's up with that?
They do not. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
What's up with that?
Yeah, what's up with that? I don't know. Controls are pretty good. One of the nice things about this, let me fire it up again here, is, the old quick menu that everybody's doing?
Yeah.
You guys have their equivalent of the quick menu, which is the little function button here. And if you go into function mode, all right, that gives you access to exposure compensation, ISO, white balance, um, the extended dynamic range option, and the picture modes. So that's something you can get through the quick menu, which is not bad. It means that exposure compensation is the only important thing that you can't get to real quickly, because obviously shutter, aperture, you can get to directly from the physical controls of the camera.
The camera started, as you describe it and you run down these features, it's starting to sound like the ideal camera for the NEX shooter to like take with them. Like say you're out on a shoot and you're doing HDR around Paris, and you go back to the room, you throw your kit down, you change clothes, you grab that thing, and you go back out to meet, the person for dinner. And it's a smaller, less obtrusive camera, but the OS and the capabilities of the camera are comparable in some ways to the NEX. So it's not like it's a completely different operating system to learn.
You're determined to figure out the proper use case for this camera.
I'm trying to find out who it's for.
But the scenario you described is a good one. This is the camera you take with you when you don't want to have a camera.
I thought that was my phone, but
no, sorry, but yeah. Well, again, is it better than the phone? Well, it is in some ways.
Yes,
but the point is,
my phone doesn't do half the things that you're running down in this list, but it does some of them okay.
So this is the whole world of compromise, and this is what we start with. If you go from your full frame DSLRs, you go to your crop sensor, you go to your mirrorless, you go to your micro four thirds, you work your way down to point and shoot, you work your way down to mobile.
Yeah.
All the way along, you're compromising. So this is just another point on the compromise curve. And like I say, this is a camera I might buy if I wanted a camera that I could basically go out and not have anything attached to me. This would fit in a pocket. And if I have my phone, so I've got to use both of my front pockets. One bulge with a camera, one bulge with a phone. Right?
You're really happy to see everybody you meet.
That's right. So
I don't know. Does the thing? I know you're probably gonna get to this, but I'm just gonna jump to it. Does it have Wi-Fi built into it?
It does. It has Wi-Fi, but it's Sony's Wi-Fi, and I've never been that impressed with what they do. It does not have the installable apps like the NEX6 has.
The 5R and N as well.
Oh, is that right? I keep forgetting about that. That's right. We reviewed that camera. I still forget. Anyway, you can use their Play Memories apps for iOS and Android. You can certainly control the camera, download images, and so forth, but you don't get the installable apps. It has NFC also, so if you have an Android device and you want that simple setup, you've got that.
Which is really cool. I wish NFC was just standard on every mobile device out there. For a photographer, the whole NFC thing about payments and swipe your phone at 7-Eleven to get your Slurpee, that kind of thing, whatever. But for at least whatever for me. But for me, it's like to be able to take this is the Moto X, to be able to take the Moto X and tap it to the side of my phone and immediately be seeing the images on that camera, or tap the side of the camera and immediately be seeing the images on my phone from that camera. That's magical for me, and that's just like. Come on, it's got to be that, because I showed you the alternative when we were recording another different episode with the iPhone of how you have to step through 9 different steps just to get to the point where you can see the images, right?
That's another reason I want to be you, because you have NFC and I don't. No, it is very cool. And those of us who live in the world of Apple don't have NFC and probably never will. Right. But it is a nice feature, and it does, to be honest, not having to go through the setup is something that makes these Wi-Fi apps more usable by quite a bit. I set them up on my phone, and by the time I get everything working, it's like, why am I doing this? I can't even remember.
Yeah.
You didn't ask me the most important thing about this.
Uh-oh.
You didn't ask me. Is the LCD touch sensitive?
Oh, yeah. Is it?
Right. No.
What?
No. What's up with that?
It's not touch.
It is not. They're still not on the touch sensitive bandwagon.
I don't understand that. There's got to be a good reason for that, Doug. We should be moles and go undercover inside of Sony and figure out.
Maybe it's some patent thing. I don't know. But
I don't get it. I don't get
yeah,
it.
it should be touch sensitive. It's also not fully articulating, but let's face it, it's a point and shoot. So I'll
At
cut it
that
some slack
size, I'm
for that.
okay. Yeah, at that size, the fully articulated LCD, I could deal with that. But not having a touch screen on there it seems like a huge omission, and maybe even a step back.
I agree. I agree. At this point, it's not like they haven't had time to put it into the camera. These touch sensitive screens have been around for a long time.
Yeah.
Good image stabilization. I like that. So I think it's time to get to the bottom line of this thing.
Yes.
You know, the reason I like this camera, and I do like this camera very much, is the great image quality. I was impressed with, in 2 weeks I've had this camera, I've been impressed with the number of really good shots I've come home with.
Mm-hmm.
I've printed some of them, up to 16 by 20. Of course, it could go larger, but my printer doesn't go much larger. And I've shot at ISO 3200. I've printed 16 by 20 inches, ISO 3200 in color, because going to black and white is a little bit of a way to cheat around some noise.
Yeah.
And the images look great. And that's something that I simply cannot do with my iPhone 5.
Right.
It's not going to give me, high ISO, low light, big prints. And I was very impressed with it.
But
just
that reason, devil's advocate on that, Doug. Just devil's advocate. So you couldn't do that with your iPhone 5 or your Nexus or whatever, right, camera, but you could do it with that camera. However, I would argue if you were putting yourself in the situation where you wanted to capture images that were likely to be blown up to 16 by 20, you would probably, knowing Doug K, reach for your A7 or A7R when you have it in hand and shoot with that instead of this, correct?
Yeah, but this is a kind of camera, again, that I can take when I don't want to have this camera. When I want to go out to dinner, I'm not the kind of person who carries a camera everywhere he goes.
Yeah.
And so...
But you're not shooting... You're going to be shooting 16 by 20 shots at dinner?
Well,
look at this salt and pepper shaker, honey. I'm going to blow this up.
My wife does that. She says, "Why are you taking a picture of that rock?" I get this all the time.
It's not a rock, honey. It's art. It's art.
Look at the light. Look at the depth.
Yeah.
So, I think if people don't relate to that use case, then it probably isn't the camera for them. But for me, and I think for a lot of people, there are times when I want to be sort of camera free, but I want to be prepared for anything.
Yeah.
And
I'm just playing devil's advocate. I think it's an awesome camera.
Yeah, and you never know when you might capture that award-winning photograph, and if all you had was the iPhone, well, then you'd get an award-winning iPhone shot of it.
But
and
granted,
that does happen.
My iPhone 5S has a pretty good camera in here. I'm just saying. It's a pretty impressive camera. But it's not, you're right, it doesn't have the math and the computational power and the optics that thing has in it.
Yep.
Definitely.
Yeah, this has that Beyonce processor too. Not the Beyonce processor, but the Beyonce processor.
Yeah, the Beyonce processor would be Jay-Z.
Yeah, that's right. We won't go there today. But it's...
I went there.
You did. Better you than me.
Yeah.
If you look at the competition for this, so what else is out there? I think the only real competitor is probably the Canon PowerShot S120, which is quite a bit cheaper at $450. Remember, this is $750. These are retail prices, full list price.
Yeah.
That one's got a smaller sensor, 12 megapixels. It's got a 5x zoom instead of about a 3.5x zoom, but it has a touch screen.
Imagine that.
And that takes great pictures. I think the only issue with the S120 is it's not going to cut it in the low light the way this does. This does an incredibly good job for such a small sensor and a small camera in low light situations, and that's what really impressed me more than anything else.
So there's at the top of this when we started this, you said was it Wirecutter said that this was the best pocket camera. Now, like jumping down to where we are, we're talking about your recommendations and the end of it. So best pocket camera with a couple of footnotes and asterisks. Is that what I'm hearing? Because the missing the touch LCD. What else is it missing other than the touch that would make it like the perfect pocketable camera?
Well, it's a compromise in every category, obviously, but I think the only ones that are significant to me are the price, because I think $750 is a lot of money for a camera that's not really a camera.
Yeah.
And I wish it had a little more zoom range. That's one thing for me. So the fact that it's what do we say? It's about I guess it's a 3.6x zoom range. I find myself wanting a little more reach or a little wider shot more than I wished I could. But that's the trade-off you're getting for some really good optics. Yeah. And again, trade-offs. Those are the two things.
Okay. So then recommendations: buy it, pass, or rent it.
Always rent first. I mean, these days, if you have the chance of getting something for a weekend or a week where you have to put down real money, I think that's a smart thing to do. Mm-hmm. But having now played with it, it's a camera I would consider buying it. And I think if you want the best point and shoot, I agree with Gordon, I agree with Wirecutter, I agree with all sorts of other people who have written reviews and said this is currently the best point and shoot out there. And I think that's true. If your budget's a little tighter, I would go for the Canon S120. I think that's a good runner-up, and it'll save you $300. I do think, and here's the punchline, I would skip this electronic viewfinder.
Save your $450.
Yeah, absolutely. You could buy a whole other camera, right?
Yeah.
And I can say that. I was able to get it from Borrow Lenses and try it, and I'm the kind of person, as I've said in many of the reviews, who doesn't normally like to shoot with a rear LCD because of bifocal issues and not, I have to do the game where, I'm doing this or I'm holding it way out and looking at it like this.
Yeah.
But what I've learned is that if you tilt the screen up, right, if you do this with it, that you can actually just hold it slightly low and do the same thing. So I'm now back to being pretty comfortable with rear LCDs as a way of taking pictures.
Yeah.
And because of that, I think don't mess with this. It's nice, it's pretty, but it's just something else to add to your pocket.
Yeah. I was gonna say save that money and buy another lens, but this thing doesn't have interchangeable lenses. So save that money and buy a lens for your NEX or your A7 or A7R. Right.
There you go. There you go. Any day now, mine's going to show up.
I knew you were going to say that. You hitting reload on the FedEx page, aren't you?
Yeah, you know me too well.
You really do. Where is it? In
fact, I can see if the UPS guy comes to the front door, I can see him from here. All right, so that's it. I think it's a great camera. I love it. I think it's the best point and shoot out there. And if I needed a point and shoot, it's the one I'd rush out and buy.
All right. Well, that's a fair assessment. I think I did okay with my devil's advocate sort of, challenging. I'm still, half of that was devil's advocate and half of it was, really, who is this for? Who is this camera for? Because Doug, to be honest with you, I think about it and it looks like a wonderful camera, but my mirrorless cameras are so small. And my little mirrorless kit is so small, and then I have my phone. So if I'm reaching for something, I was trying to think of the situation that I would reach for that, other than knowing that I had an iPhone 5S camera with me, or I could take one of the mirrorless cameras with me. Why would I grab that guy? Okay, even though you said it's small, but the mirrorless cameras are small too, and I could put a small lens on there. So that's what I'm trying to reconcile.
Let me ask you a question. How many cameras do you have?
Really?
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, I know. It's a trick question because I knew you wouldn't know the answer to it.
I don't know.
Right. But that's why this is not a good camera for you. You're not the customer. You're not the buyer for this. If you are someone who only wanted a point and shoot, who had the last camera they bought had film in it, for example.
Yeah.
Or if you had a big honking DSLR and that was the only good digital camera you had, this might be a great alternative. This might be a great second camera with again a totally different mission than what you otherwise have. You have too many cameras that are close to this in terms of what mission they can fulfill.
Yeah, but to be honest with you, as I look at these cameras, I really only have three cameras that I shoot with actively. I have the Sony NEX5R, which I shoot with a lot. I love that camera. I have the Olympus OMD EM5, also in love with that, and the Panasonic GX7. So those are the three cameras that I shoot with the most now. But I also have the DSLRs and all that. Those have been kind of gathering dust, though.
Right. Keep counting, right? Right.
That's three. Now, that was three.
All right, listen. I want every one of our listeners to yell me if they have more than 3 cameras. See?
Crickets.
Not a single
cue the cricket
person,
sound
right?
effect. Right.
So again, this is not for people who, I would assume that our audience is not loaded with cameras like the two of us are.
Right.
But yeah, you have a lot that really come close to this, close enough that it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Although just wait, one's going to end up in your lap someday, and you're going to fall in love with it too. So this happens,
No, Doug, I wanted to do this. So when you said if you have more than 3 cameras, raise your hand. I wanted to do this.
Very good. Very good. And we didn't even rehearse that.
We did not rehearse that.
Excellent. All right. Frederick, thank you very much.
So thank you, Doug. This has been an awesome episode. I know I kicked it on a little bit longer than we wanted to go. But yeah, I think we covered everything about this new camera. So yeah, perfect. It's another all about the gear in the camera.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
All right, see ya.